Today's youth need teachers, volunteers, and most of all, well, they need you. I'm Doug Edwards, and I'm going to be talking with real youth mentors and students to give you the knowledge you need to be the best youth worker possible. This is Youth Worker on Fire.
Oh, you're trying to bring me down and run me out of town. You're taking what you want, but you can't take my rhythm now. I'm walking to my own beat, just gonna be me. I'm not replicating nobody.
So a few years had gone by. We realized we need to do some fundraising banquets in South Lake County. In fact, it was my last year after doing a couple of these banquets that we would bring the students in that were in our programs from the schools. We would show them off. And if someone had come to know Christ personally, they would tell the community in this banquet. Then my last year, when Andy McDaniel, who just this year went to be with Jesus, when Andy came, he said, we don't need a big speaker. You've been here long enough, and these people love you and love the program. They believe in it. And you've got some people that have helped you raise funds that have a story to tell, and they need to tell their story. Senator Langley spoke that year. His children, five of the six of his children have been a part of the program somewhere along the way. And we started letting students talk. We let some of our people from the community talk, which was better than me talking. See, I'd been there. I'd been fighting the fight. And people had heard me and talk and things like that. But it really only matters when lives are changed. Your voice is important, but it's not nearly as important as the lives that have changed you. And remember, Jesus said, greater works will you do. He told his disciples that I have done. And what he meant was, I am the Messiah. I'm the guy, but you are the results of me. You and the people, the things that happen around here, your stories are what's going to tell my story. And sure enough, that was our biggest fundraising year. And it was because people saw the results and heard the voices of the people's lives who were changed, the students who were changed. And so when I traveled up and started my 29-year journey with a church, God didn't want me in South Florida. He wanted me to stay in the county. First I said no, and then the second time God kept saying, you need to call them back. You need to talk to them. I said yes after calling him and saying, have you found somebody? Well, here's what we would do. We would do a winter retreat, and we'd have our students come up and talk to the church and tell their stories. Now, did they speak really well most of the time? No. In fact, it would annoy me because there's so many spiritual things would happen, and some of them would get up there and say, you know what? Hey, we had a lot of fun. It was fun. Well, here's what I didn't realize. To some people in the congregation, that might not have been exactly what they wanted to hear, but to the parents of the students, they were going, oh my goodness, my kid had fun. This is a big deal. My kid never has fun. Not when he goes with us, and so different things like that were happening, but then there would be testimonials that would come out, such as the one girl who was on the middle school retreat, and we were talking about knowing Jesus in your heart. I was speaking to him, giving my best foot forward and saying some good stuff on this retreat in the mountains of North Carolina in the wintertime, and she just spoke out because she wasn't a church goer. She was just here because of us, and she said, well, how do we do it? And I stopped. I was in the middle of I said, excuse me, say it again. What? How do we do it? You keep telling us to ask Jesus in our heart and things like that. How do we do it? And so I explained to her how to ask Jesus in her heart. And I said, do you want to ask Jesus in your heart now? And in front of everybody, she said, yes. And so we prayed right there for her and whoever else wanted to come to know Jesus. And that story was told when we got back. There are other stories that students would tell in front of the church about mission trips, about ski retreats, at baptisms. They would tell those stories, students and staff. I remember one time they said, hey, we're having discipleship and some things were going on, and I had to be in a one meeting with students along with other people throughout the city who had students going through discipleship on Sunday. But we had a new person's class that we would have on Sundays that would last about 6 weeks. And one of those weeks either I would go in and tell about the ministry or whatever. But in this case, Rodney Mashburn and Jim Budzinski went and said, we'll go in for you. We'll tell them. They told our story to those people better than I could have told it. Why? Because their lives were changed by our ministry. I was there as a hired hand. They were volunteers who said, this is what's happening. We see students' lives change. Our lives have changed. Here's what we do. Here's why we do it, because we just kept driving home. Those stories of, we're doing this. We see a future in these students. We know they're going to go beyond their lifetime at this church as teenagers. Their life is going to continue on, and their lives are going to affect our lives and going to change the world. And we keep telling that story, and student after student would see this. I remember Nicole Keene, after she come to know Christ and she asked Jesus in her heart, and she called me up one day. She says, I got it. And that, by the way, you can go back. She's one of the interviews in Youth Worker on Fire. Go back and find Nicole Keene Dean. That's her name now. And April Jones had talked to her. April didn't even know what she said. I called April. I said, congratulations on what you leading Nicole to Jesus. She said, what? How did I do that? And she didn't even know. God was flowing through her, and she was very open about her faith and those things. And somewhere, something she had said had clicked in Nicole's spirit. And so when Nicole would speak, one time she spoke on missions because she was at another meeting, and I was kind of sad and annoyed at this because we should have been the ones to help her get there. And she had gone on mission trips with us, but she was in college, and we didn't have a night meeting. So she was going to a night meeting of college students over. She was invited over in Orlando. In fact, I actually think it was Altamont Springs. But she went to this meeting. She said the meeting wasn't even very good. She said, but this guy stood up before the meeting started because they just kind of, lackadaisical about how things are going. But we had a lot of people there. And he said, hey, there's a mission in Amsterdam. If you want to sign up and you want to go to Amsterdam and stay for an extended period of time, come see me. So she did. She came up and she saw him, and she would tell that story later in church while she was raising money to go to Amsterdam. I think the first time was 3 months, and I think she went back again and stayed for 6 months. It was a longer extended period of time. But she talked about the things that God said to her to go that night at that meeting. She talked about how, against all odds of her parents really wanting to, but her parents are always very supportive of her. Whatever it was that helped her raise the money, and our church was part of that, because she told her story. And because we would stand them up in front of the church and let them tell their stories. And almost after every ski retreat, winter retreat, mission trip, we would have a student tell their story. And at graduation, the graduates, the ones who knew Jesus, would pray and talk, and we would recognize all of them. But the ones who had a relationship with Christ and been growing in discipleship, they'd tell about their discipleship meetings and our discipleship leaders and those things. And that is when people started not only giving to student ministry more, our student ministry budget kept growing and growing and growing. It wasn't because I was a great communicator and a great salesman. It's because stories matter to people, and they must hear them from the source of the people's lives who the stories are changing. So when they go on a trip, they need to hear from that student. They need to hear from that staffer whose life's changed. They need to hear from that parent who's just overwhelmed at how much change has happened in their child because they're going to student ministries on a regular basis in your group or your organization or whatever. And so people started giving more and more and more. People would come up and go, hey, do you have enough money for these kids to go on this mission trip? I mean, each mission trip would usually run $1,000 to, I think the middle school trips to Mexico would actually only run about $650, $700. But that, as time went on, it goes up. But all of the high school or college mission trips were $1,000, $1,200. And people started saying, how can we sponsor the next mission trip? We'd have them write letters. How can we sponsor? How many people actually need money? And the money would pour in and pour in and pour in. And finally, at one of the meetings at one of our board meetings, because we'd go through budget and different things like that, and board meetings usually are boring. As student ministry was pumping in it, as they allowed us to speak every time, and listen, there were complaints when we'd speak. The service would go too long, or we would talk too much, or this senior pastor wasn't speaking that Sunday, or if he spoke, now it's really long, and why do we have to let those students speak? Well, that's not usually by the parents or by the staff. It's usually people who aren't invested, but might be giving big money to something else. Finally, at one of the board meetings, I remember just being shocked, and they said, how much are your volunteers having to pay to go on these trips? Because they have jobs and businesses. And I'd say, well, they have to pay the full price, or we discount it as much as possible. And then money started to come in for a fund for our volunteers, to the place that our volunteers did not have to pay their way anymore. They were already losing wages. They were already taking their week vacation, to go on a missions trip. They were already taking time off to go on the winter retreats with us and to go to Washington, D.C., where there were like 20,000 at each event of evangelism and discipleship training once every 3 years. And that was a really costly event. We'd take a lot of people to those things, a lot of students, a lot of staff. And I remember they would tell their stories, and the money would keep coming in. But when did it end? What happened? There became some problems within the church. And after years and years of fighting some of that and going, no, we still need to be up there. You need to let us talk. And they're going, well, do it another way. You got email and you got online and you got all these things when all that came about. But there's nothing like standing in front of a congregation, face to face, student to congregation, and telling their stories, and they see a real life person, a real life young lady, real life young man, a real life staffer, a real life parent up there saying, my life has changed. Jesus Christ changed my life. It was through this ministry. And when that stopped happening, and it stopped, when they would, I finally got tired of fighting. It was, we were there for almost 30 years, and those last 5, 6, 7 years, the last 5 were very, very difficult, but it started somewhere to where, let's not let the students go up there on a Sunday morning. We've got too much to say. And the bottom line is, it matters who stands up there. It matters that you stand up and those things happen and you tell them. It matters that they see their faces, out of sight, out of mind. The reason it was so hard to raise money with Youth for Christ and Young Life and all those things is we had to go individually to people. And we had to throw a banquet, which may be once a year. Once again, after that banquet, out of sight, out of mind. After that monthly newsletter, out of sight, out of mind. When you're at a church on a weekly basis, it's inside. They see you every week. They see the students coming through that spoke once, 2, 3 times a year. They see those people, and people give to what they remember and what they believe in. And when you stop speaking, when others stop telling your story, remember, it was more important that they told their story, good, bad, or ugly, better their bad story than my best story, because I'm hired to be good and hired to say those things in their minds. But when they hear unsolicited students and staff people and parents and other people in the church going, we are just overwhelmed at what God is doing in this ministry, that ministry is supported. Stories are very important. Don't let the church stop letting you have your students and your staffers tell the story of your ministry. It's more important than you telling it. And God will keep blessing and growing. See you next time.
You've been listening to the Youth Worker on Fire podcast. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and tell your friends. Also, leave a comment and tell us what you think. Stay tuned for more informative episodes.